Hello there. Today, we are going to talk about the interesting history of Detective Comics, or DC Comics for short.
DC Comics was originally called National Allied Publications and was founded by real-life military major Malcolm Wheeler-Nicholson in 1934, and a year later he published New Fun, the big comic magazine #1, later known as More Fun.
The comic was made out of 100% original material, rather than comic reprints. The comic was also the first comic book debut of Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, the future creators of Superman. Malcolm's third and final title that he personally wrote was Detective Comics and was released in 1937.
It became a triumph with the introduction of Batman in 1939. In need of cash, Malcolm partnered with magazine distributors Harry Donenfeld and Jack Leibowitz and founded Detective Comics Incorporated in 1937.
In 1938, DC published the very first Superman story in the comic book called Action Comics #1. The success of Superman was the reason for making the superhero genre so massive.
During the golden age of comics, DC released famous characters like Batman and Superman. DC also fought companies who imitated their characters.
One of these companies that DC sued was called Fawcett Comics, for their bestseller, Captain Marvel, for copying Superman. This began a court battle which ended in 1955 when Fawcett yielded and mostly stopped publishing their comics.
In 1956, under the watchful eye of the editor, Julius Schwartz, DC began to reintroduce the golden age of superhero characters. In the Comic Showcase #4, the writers presented an upgraded version of the hero, The Flash. The Flash's civilian identity, costume and his origin story were changed for a new modern audience. The issue sold very well to the publisher's surprise. In doing this brought in the Silver Age of comics for DC.
With the founding of the Comic Code Authority, the Silver Age has been a time of strict moral codes and new versions of superheroes, like The Flash, which we just spoke about. These new versions of the famous characters were presented with new and fresh superheroes like Supergirl, Adam Strange, Zatanna, and Batgirl.
New superhero teams were also created at this time, like the Justice League. With the success of DC's superhero books, it led their rival companies, like Marvel Comics, to go back to the genre. In 1966, a live-action Batman series aired on ABC in the USA, starring Adam West and Burt Ward.
The success of the 1966 Batman show helped with the rise of sales for the superhero genre, especially for DC Comics, but after a while, sales began to decline. Facing with declining sales and the growing popularity of Marvel Comics, the new editorial director, Carmine Infantino, had tried to cure the situation with a mix of new comic book characters and titles.
Carmine had also hired major talents like Steve Ditko and new talent like Neil Adams. In 1970, Jack Kirby left Marvel to create his most ambitious creation, called The Fourth World. Sadly, when it was released, the sales went poorly and management canceled further issues. However, the characters and concepts became an important part of the DC universe. In 1969, Warner Bros. Bought DC Comics.
In 1970, writer Dennis O'Neil and artist Neil Adams published Green Lantern and Green Arrow. They wanted to introduce a new level of maturity to the superhero genre by writing about social problems like race relations, pollution, and drug abuse, and is remembered as one of the most defining comic books of the Bronze Age of comics.
After this, comic book stories become darker and dealt with the social issues that we just spoke about. This separated the Bronze Age with the Golden and Silver Ages. When the Comic Code Authority denied authorizing the publication of Swamp Thing #29 in 1984, DC chose to publish the book without the approval of the Comic Code Authority.
By the end of the Bronze Age in 1985, DC experienced over 50 years of contrasting and contradictory stories. This caused sales to decline and DC to go on the verge of collapse. However, with the help of the 12-issue comic book series called Crisis on Infinite Earths, DC had an opportunity to dissolve some of its baggage of its history and start over with a fresh start and revise its major characters like Batman and Superman.
In the early 1990s, the comic book industry experienced a short boom in sales, This is thanks to the amalgamation of purchasing of books as collectibles and certain storylines gaining attention from the mainstream media. This massive growth was proved unsustainable and soon reduced to a fraction of previous levels.
In 1994, DC published 0 Hour, Crisis in Time, which was a crisis crossover that tried to settle the many inconsistencies that grew since 1985, but it failed. In 1999, writer Mark Waid tried to address the DC Universe's persisting continuity issues by introducing a concept called hypertime, and it restored the pre-crisis universe.
DC released a comic book line called Vertigo, which was more focused to an older audience. DC went into a publishing agreement with Milestone Media, which granted the company with a new line of comics that featured a more culturally and racially diverse range of superhero characters.
In March 2003, DC bought the publishing and merchandising rights of the long-running fantasy ElfQuest, which was self-published by creators Wendy and Richard Pini under the company Warp Graphics. In the beginning of 2004, DC started to lay the groundwork for a sequel to Crisis on Infinite Earths, which promised considerable changes to the DC universe.
In 2005, DC published a few limited series, establishing ever-increasing conflicts between the heroes of the DC universe, with events climaxing in the limited series Infinite Crisis. After this, DC started to publish a weekly series called 52.
Also in 2005, DC published an all-star line, featuring some of its well-known characters, and it all exists in an alternate universe without the problem of continuity of the DC universe being interfered. All-Star Batman and Robin the Boy Wonder was published in July 2005, with All-Star Superman being published in November that year.
In September 2009, Warner Bros. Announced that DC Comics will be subordinate to DC Entertainment Incorporated, with Diane Nelson, who was the president of Warner Premiere, becoming the president of this newly formed company, and DC Comics president and publisher, Paul Levitz, moved to the position of contributing editor and consultant there. DC also released a few movies during this time. For example, Christopher Nolan made the Dark Knight trilogy from 2005 to 2012.
In 2010, DC started to make a digital edition of its comics, and in the following year, DC Comics again rebooted its fictional continuity with a series of comics called The New 52. This was to boost comic book sales.
During the 2010s, DC started to release movies under the DC Extended Universe, or the DCEU, which started with Zack Snyder's Man of Steel in 2013, which earned more than $600 million. Later movies of the DCEU included Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice, Justice League, Wonder Woman 1984, and Aquaman. It also released non-DCEU movies like the psychological thriller called The Joker in 2019.
So that's the history of DC so far. It has come a long way from a small publishing company to one of the biggest companies in the world.
We thank you for watching this video. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe for more videos.